Is anybody there?
No.
Who's there?
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who?
Grosse is here.
In a quiet London suburb, an ordinary family began hearing knocks, whispers, and voices that weren't their own. At first it was subtle, a tap on the wall, a dragging sound under the floorboards. But soon the furniture began to move by itself. Objects flew through the air, and an 11-year-old girl became the unwilling voice of something, or someone, beyond this world. What followed would become the most documented haunting in modern history. A case so disturbing, it drew scientists, skeptics, and priests into one small house on Green Street. This is the Enfield Poltergeist, the haunting that changed everything. Peggy Hodgson was a hard-working single mother doing her best to raise 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny and Billy, in a modest council house at 284 Green Street, Enfield, North London. It was 1977, and life wasn't easy, but the Hodgsons were like any other family on their block, close-knit, noisy, and just trying to get by. Then one ordinary night, everything began to change. It started small, a faint knocking sound coming from the walls. Peggy thought it was the pipes or maybe the kids playing around. But the knocks grew louder, sharper, and more deliberate, echoing through the house when everyone was still. Soon the furniture began to move on its own. A heavy chest of drawers slid across the room, blocking the door, as if something, or someone, didn't want them to leave. Peggy tried to push it back, but it wouldn't budge. Then came the toys. The children's favourite marbles and Legos began flying through the air, not dropped, not tossed, thrown, with force, from invisible hands. Janet and Margaret screamed for their mother, but Peggy couldn't explain what was happening. She could only watch in disbelief as her home, once filled with laughter and warmth, turned into a place of fear. Neighbours came to see for themselves, but what they witnessed left them speechless. Strange knocks, moving furniture, toys that seemed alive, and in the middle of it all, a terrified family who no longer felt safe in their own home. The haunting of Green Street had begun. It was late August 1977, a warm night in Enfield, when the Hodgson family's life changed forever. The children were settling into bed, giggling and restless, when the first sound came, a faint knock, then another. 3 slow measured thuds against the wall. At first, 11-year-old Janet thought her little brother Johnny was playing a trick, but when she looked over, his eyes were wide open, staring back at her in confusion. The knocks grew louder, echoing from one wall to the next, as if something unseen was moving around the room. Then the beds began to shake. Not just a tremor, but a violent, rhythmic vibration that made the headboards rattle. The children screamed for their mother. Peggy Hodgson rushed in, half asleep, ready to scold them for fooling around. But when she stepped into the room, the air felt different, heavy, still, and electric. She watched in disbelief as the chest of drawers beside the wall began to scrape across the floor. The sound was deep and grinding, wood against wood. Slowly, the drawers slid forward, inch by inch, until they pressed tight against the bedroom door. Peggy tried to push it back, but it wouldn't move. It was as if some invisible force was holding it in place. She pulled harder, her hands trembling, and that's when she realised the truth. It wasn't the children. Something else was in the room with them. Panic took over. She grabbed her children and fled into the street, barefoot and shaking, pounding on the neighbour's door for help. The neighbours, sympathetic but sceptical, followed her inside. The house was quiet, too quiet, until the knocking started again. This time, everyone heard it. Loud, deliberate, coming from inside the walls themselves. The neighbours tried to find the source, banging on the walls, checking pipes, but the sound seemed to move on their own, from room to room, like footsteps crawling through the plaster. That night, Peggy called the police. When the officers arrived, the family huddled together, explaining what had happened. One of the officers, WPC Carolyn Heaps, inspected the home. She later testified that she saw a chair in the living room slide several feet across the floor, with no one near it. No wind, no slope, no explanation. Her report would become one of the first official records of the haunting at 284 Green Street. From that night on, the Hodgsons knew their home was no longer their own. The sounds never stopped, the fear never left, and Janet, the bright, curious 11-year-old girl at the heart of it all, began to feel the presence watching her more than anyone else. It wasn't just noises, she would later whisper. It was like something wanted us out. By September, the house at 284 Green Street no longer felt like a home. The walls that once echoed with laughter now groaned and whispered. Every morning brought a new disturbance. Something broken, something missing, something moved. At first it was small things. Toys hurled across the room when no one was there. Doors slamming with enough force to shake the picture frames. Objects appearing in strange places, a pillow found downstairs, a Bible lying open on the kitchen floor, a teacup shattered on the windowsill. But soon the activity grew darker. Janet, the quiet brown-haired girl at the centre of it all, began to hear voices. They came at night, whispering her name from the corners of her room. Sometimes she would wake to the sound of breathing, heavy, wet and close to her ear. Her siblings said they saw her bed shake, lifting slightly off the floor. Other times, they found her dragged halfway across the room, tangled in blankets, her body trembling. Once, Peggy ran in after hearing her daughter scream, and saw Janet thrown backward against the wall, as if struck by invisible hands. Cold spots began appearing in random corners of the house, sudden drops in temperature that made their breath visible. The air grew thick with a foul, rotting smell no one could explain. Even the family dog barked at empty doorways, tail tucked between its legs. Peggy, desperate and exhausted, turned to the local priest. He blessed the home, sprinkling holy water across the rooms and reciting prayers meant to drive out whatever evil lingered there. But instead of peace, the house responded with fury. Loud bangs shook the walls that night. Lights flickered. Janet screamed as furniture slid across her room, trapping her against the bed. Word began to spread through Enfield. Neighbours whispered about strange sounds at all hours, about the Hodgsons' frightened faces. Reporters started gathering outside, cameras waiting for something to happen. From the street, they could sometimes hear it, a deep knocking that echoed through the walls of number 284. Inside, the family clung to one another, afraid to sleep, afraid to speak. Each night brought a new wave of fear, and as Janet stared into the shadows of her room, she felt it, that terrible, unshakable sense that the house itself was no longer just a house. It felt like the walls were alive, she later said, like the house itself had turned against us. By the winter of 1977, the haunting at 284 Green Street had taken on a voice, and it came from the mouth of 11-year-old Janet Hodgson. At first it began as murmurs, soft, low tones that seemed to come from her throat while she slept. Her mother thought it was a nightmare. But soon the voice grew louder, clearer, until it was speaking directly. It was not Janet's voice, it was deeper, a gravelly, rasping growl that no child could produce for long. The family and investigators described it as like two voices speaking at once, one inside her, one behind her. When asked who it was, the voice replied, "My name is Bill Wilkins. I lived here before, and I died in that chair." The same chair that still sat in their living room. Investigators Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair from the Society for Psychical Research recorded everything. Hundreds of hours of tapes capturing the eerie exchanges. Sometimes the voice would mock them, laughing cruelly, refusing to answer questions. Other times, it would claim to be trapped, lost or angry, that the children were in my house. doctors examined Janet, trying to determine if the sound could be physically possible. Speech specialists confirmed her vocal cords showed signs of strain, as if she'd been producing a sound far beyond her natural range. Yet she kept doing it, day after day, voice unbroken, body trembling. Witnesses said that when the voice took over, Janet's whole demeanour changed. Her eyes glazed, her posture stiffened, and her expressions became those of someone older, someone else. One night, as the voice spoke through her, the bed began to shake violently, and then she lifted off it. Levitation. Multiple witnesses, including journalists and neighbours, reported seeing Janet suspended several feet above her bed. Cameras captured her mid-air, mouth open, eyes wide, the curtains billowing around her like waves. The voice, laughing through her lips, shouted, "This is my house!" Even the skeptics fell silent. Reporters who had come expecting a hoax found themselves pale, shaken, unable to explain what they had just witnessed. And through it all, Janet's real voice, her own, seemed to fade more and more each day, buried beneath the thing that had claimed her. Whatever was in that house had learned to speak, and it chose Janet Hodgson as its mouthpiece. Whatever was in that house had found its voice, and it chose Janet to speak through. October 1977. After weeks of sleepless nights, moving furniture and terrified screams, the Hodgson family finally received help. Not from priests, not from the police, but from investigators. Two men arrived at 284 Green Street, armed not with holy water, but with tape recorders and cameras. Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, members of the Society for Psychical Research, had come to find the truth behind what many were already calling the Enfield Poltergeist. Maurice Grosse was no stranger to tragedy. Only months earlier, he had lost his daughter in a car accident. Some said that loss made him more open to the idea that life, and perhaps something beyond it, continued after death. He approached the case not as a thrill seeker, but as a man searching for answers. Lyon Playfair, on the other hand, was a journalist, analytical, skeptical, and meticulous. He documented psychic phenomena across South America and had no interest in sensationalism. His goal was simple: document the evidence and find the truth wherever it led. The moment they stepped inside the modest council house, the air felt wrong, cold, heavy, unsettling. Grosse later said, "There was a presence there. You could feel it before you could see it." They began setting up their equipment, reel-to-reel audio recorders, in the children's bedrooms, cameras on tripods facing the hallway, motion detectors near the living room. The Hodgsons huddled together, watching these quiet, methodical men move through their haunted home, as if preparing for war. Then the activity started again. A sudden metallic bang echoed through the walls. Toys that had been placed neatly on a shelf flew across the room. A marble rolled uphill. The investigators froze and kept the tape rolling. Throughout the night, Grosse and Playfair recorded dozens of incidents, knocks that responded to questions, furniture shifting on its own, a curtain twisting in mid-air without wind, and beneath it all, that feeling, an invisible pressure, a charge in the air, as if something alive and watching was coiled in every corner. Playfair later wrote, "It wasn't chaos, it was control, deliberate, mocking, and intelligent." But not everyone was convinced. Even among the SPR, some whispered that Janet's attention-seeking behaviour might be influencing events, consciously or not. Could her grief and fear have created a psychological storm that manifested physically? Or was she manipulating her environment in ways that fooled even trained observers? Grosse, however, refused to believe it was all a hoax. He became personally attached to the family, particularly Janet. He saw a child tormented, frightened, and far too young to fabricate such terror. As the nights dragged on, he told colleagues that what he witnessed defied logic, but not reality. For Grosse and Playfair, the reports would later say, this was no ghost story. It was a battlefield between belief and doubt. Soon after, Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair began their nightly vigils inside 284 Green Street. Their tape recorders started picking up something no one could easily explain. At first it was simple, the sound of knocks, deliberate and patterned, responding to questions. When Grosse would ask, "Are you there?" a single knock would echo back. He'd ask, "How many of us are in the room?" The tape would capture the exact number of knocks. Over the weeks, those recordings multiplied. Hundreds of reels filled with thuds, bangs, crashes, and eerie silences between each burst of sound. But then one night, the tapes caught something far more disturbing. Without warning, Janet Hodgson's voice changed. In the middle of a conversation, her tone dropped. Lower, rougher, rasping through her throat like gravel. Maurice Grosse froze. Playfair immediately turned up the recorder. From Janet's small frame came the unmistakable sound of a man's voice. It introduced itself, slowly, deliberately. "My name is Bill Wilkins. I used to live here before I died on that chair." The room fell silent. Janet blinked, confused, as if unaware of what she'd just said. Then the voice spoke again, deeper, louder, mocking. "You're a fool, you can't get rid of me." When investigators later checked public records, what they found left even the skeptics uneasy. There had been a man named Bill Wilkins, an older resident who had lived at 284 Green Street years earlier. He had died of a brain hemorrhage, right there in the living room, sitting in his favourite chair. The recordings grew more frequent, the voice more aggressive. Sometimes it laughed uncontrollably, other times it whispered threats. During one session, the voice shouted, "I'll tell you what happened. I went blind, then I died. In that bloody chair." Experts were brought in to study the tapes. Speech pathologists noted that the sound came not from Janet's throat, but from deep within her chest cavity, a feat nearly impossible for a child to produce or sustain for more than a few seconds. Yet Janet, under observation, could keep it up for hours. Playfair later wrote, "If this was ventriloquism, she was the greatest ventriloquist who ever lived." The evidence divided everyone who heard it. To some, these tapes were undeniable proof, the voice of a restless spirit caught speaking from beyond the grave. To others, they were the perfect illusion, a frightened girl, consciously or unconsciously, channeling trauma into sound. Even today, the recordings remain some of the most chilling ever captured in a paranormal investigation. You can hear them, the hiss of the old tape, the crackle of the microphone, and beneath it, that impossible, guttural voice. As Playfair later admitted, if it was a hoax, it was the most hauntingly perfect one ever caught on tape. Weeks turned into months, and 284 Green Street became less a home than a laboratory for the unknown. Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair no longer came as guests, they lived the haunting. Their sleeping bags were rolled out in the Hodgsons' living room. Their recorders and cameras filled every corner. By late 1978, the Enfield haunting had consumed their lives. Newspapers couldn't get enough. Headlines screamed about Britain's most haunted house. Reporters camped outside, hoping for a glimpse of flying furniture or a photograph of Janet mid-levitation. Television crews pleaded for interviews. Neighbours whispered about the possessed girl down the street. What had started as a family's nightmare had now become a national spectacle. But within the house, the battle lines were blurring. Objects still moved on their own, toys thrown, chairs toppled, voices growling from nowhere. Janet continued to convulse during violent fits, her small body arching unnaturally as the deep voice spoke through her. Yet there were moments that felt wrong, moments when the activity seemed forced, when Janet's eyes flicked toward the camera before something happened. Grosse refused to doubt. He saw in Janet a child tormented by something far beyond human reach. He'd lost his own daughter not long before, and perhaps, in this haunted girl, he found something to believe in again. Playfair, though, began to waver. He admitted privately that Janet might sometimes exaggerate or fake minor events, but even he couldn't deny that much of what they'd seen defied explanation. There were moments, he later wrote, that made the hair on my arm stand up. Moments when I knew, no matter what the skeptics said, something unexplainable was happening in that house. As the debate spread beyond Enfield, the world split into two camps. Skeptics called it the longest-running magic trick in history. A desperate family, a clever child, and two gullible investigators. Believers saw it as the ultimate proof that the veil between worlds could, in rare moments, be torn apart. The Society for Psychical Research eventually archived over 200 hours of audio, dozens of photographs, and thousands of pages of notes. One of the most comprehensive records of alleged supernatural activity ever compiled. Even decades later, those tapes still echo with bangs, laughter, and that voice, rough, mocking, and utterly inhuman. By the time Grosse and Playfair finally stepped out of 284 Green Street for the last time, nothing had been resolved. The family would never be the same. The investigators would spend the rest of their lives defending or doubting what they had witnessed. And the world would continue to argue. Was the Enfield haunting proof that spirits walk among us, or proof of how deeply we need to believe that they do? The quiet North London street of Green Street was never meant to be famous, but by late 1977, the Hodgson family's modest council house had become the most talked about address in Britain. Journalists began arriving in droves. The Daily Mirror was one of the first to report on the haunting. Their photographer swore he saw furniture moving on its own. The next morning, his story hit the papers, complete with eerie photographs of Janet seemingly levitating from her bed. Within days, television vans lined the street. BBC reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers crowded outside number 284, all desperate to glimpse the ghost that had captured the nation's imagination. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Reporters jostled for interviews. Neighbours peeked through the windows, and the children, especially Janet and Margaret, were thrust unwillingly into the spotlight. Cameras rolled as investigators from the Society for Psychical Research conducted their nightly vigils. Every creak, every knock, every moving toy became national news. And soon, the story divided the country. To believers, the Enfield haunting was undeniable. A genuine case of supernatural activity unfolding before witnesses and cameras alike. They pointed to the dozens of adults, police officers, reporters, and investigators who all claimed to have seen impossible things with their own eyes. But skeptics were relentless. Magicians and psychologists offered natural explanations: ventriloquism, stage tricks, simple mischief. They accused Janet of using her voice to imitate the ghost and of pulling furniture with hidden string. Some even claimed the girls were exploiting the investigators' desire to believe, crafting an elaborate hoax for fame and attention. Yet even the most cynical reporters left the house uneasy. Objects did move, sometimes in full view of multiple witnesses. Toys flew across rooms, doors slammed with no wind, recorders captured sounds no one could trace. As one BBC correspondent later recalled, "I came expecting a story about hysteria. I left with the feeling that something or someone was in that house." The Enfield case had evolved beyond a haunting. It had become a cultural battleground, pitting faith against reason, skepticism against wonder. And for the Hodgson family, it was no longer just a mystery to survive. It was a storm they could never escape. It's late 1978. The small bedroom at 284 Green Street is thick with tension, the kind that feels like it's waiting to break. Investigators and photographers from the Daily Mirror and the Society for Psychical Research crowd the narrow space, their cameras aimed toward a trembling 12-year-old girl. Janet Hodgson lies restless in her bed, her breathing quick and shallow. She murmurs that "they're trying to lift me," the same words she's repeated in terror for nights on end. Then, without warning, her body convulses. Her arms twist upward, her legs stretch taut, and in a flash of movement that freezes the room, she rises. For several seconds, Janet appears suspended in mid-air, her small frame arching forward as if pushed by an invisible gust. One camera clicks, then another. In that brief, impossible instant, time seems to stop. When she lands, the room erupts. Investigators rush forward. Her mother screams her name. The Daily Mirror photographer checks his camera. He's captured a series of 3 stark black and white images. Janet mid-ascent, mid-flight, mid-fall. The photographs become iconic overnight. Newspapers call her the Flying Girl. The images run on front pages around the world. Grainy proof, believers say, that something otherworldly is happening in Enfield. But not everyone is convinced. Skeptics point to the angles, arguing it's just a well-timed jump. A trick of the lens, nothing more. They say the photographs show not levitation, but hysteria. A desperate child caught between fear and fame. Yet those who were there insist otherwise. They recall seeing her hang in the air, motionless, suspended longer than gravity should allow. Even hardened reporters admitted that for a moment it felt as though the laws of nature had faltered. Janet herself described the sensation as a cold force beneath her body, like invisible hands lifting me up. But for the Hodgson family, the photographs brought no peace. Every flash of a camera was another intrusion, another reminder that their suffering had become a spectacle. Their home was no longer private. It was haunted not only by spirits, but by headlines, doubts and disbelief. And as the nights went on, the voices returned, louder than before. Objects still flew. Chairs still slid across the floor. The family began to whisper that whatever had taken hold of Janet was not done with them yet. Was Janet Hodgson lifted by unseen forces, or by her own breaking mind? The haunting no longer hides in shadows. It announces itself, loud, violent, unrelenting. Each night, inside 284 Green Street, chaos reigns. Furniture scrapes across the floor without warning. Dressers slide from one wall to another as if dragged by invisible hands. Heavy chairs topple over and crash with deafening force. The children scream. Their mother, Peggy, clings to them, powerless to stop what's happening. Small objects become weapons. Marbles, toys, and Lego bricks are flung through the air at terrifying speed. Some strike reporters. Others hit police officers who had come to debunk the story. A constable later swore she saw a chair lift clean off the floor and glide across the room. The investigators, Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, document everything. They feel sudden drops in temperature, cold spots where their breath turns visible. They watch objects vanish mid-air only to reappear in another room seconds later. But it isn't just movement anymore. The entity, whatever it is, has a voice. Deep, guttural and cruel, it seeps from Janet's throat, overlapping with her own. Sometimes it mocks, sometimes it growls. Once, during a tense moment of silence, it roared through the house. "This is my house." Grosse's notebooks fill rapidly, page after page of testimony, sketches and times. By the end, he records over 1,500 distinct disturbances. The voice becomes almost conversational. It answers questions, mimics laughter, finishes sentences. It knows things about the house and about the people inside it that no stranger could possibly know. When skeptics challenge the family, accusing them of fakery, the voice responds with chilling amusement. "You're all fools." Even the most hardened journalists, the ones who came expecting tricks and wires, leave shaken. Some refuse to ever return. By now, the haunting has evolved into something beyond sound or sight. It feels intelligent, reactive, alive. The walls creak like breath. Floors vibrate under unseen footsteps. The air hums with a pressure that makes the living room feel smaller by the second. And through it all, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. The entity doesn't just haunt the Hodgsons' house. It inhabits it. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was as if the house itself had come alive. Hodgsons had survived 2 years of fear, but survival didn't mean peace. In a desperate attempt to end the nightmare, Peggy moves the furniture. Beds are dragged to new corners, wardrobes pushed against walls that once trembled. The children begin sleeping downstairs close together, hoping the entity won't follow, but it does. The first night, they hear it again. The knocks, slow, deliberate, coming from inside the walls. Toys begin rolling across the floor of empty rooms. Lights flicker, doors creak open on their own. At times a shadow moves along the hallway, though no one is there to cast it. Janet lies awake, staring into the darkness, unable to move. She hears it whisper, low and close to her ear, "Get out, or die here." Her brothers start sleepwalking. Margaret wakes to find Johnny standing in the doorway, his eyes wide open, but unseeing, whispering about a man by the bed. Billy screams in his sleep, pointing to corners of the room that no one else dares to look at. The house is suffocating. Every sound, the tick of a clock, the rustle of curtains, feels loaded with threat. Priests are called. The home is blessed again and again. Holy water splashed across the walls, prayers echoing through the narrow corridors. For a night or two, there's calm. Then, another bang, another whisper, another wave of dread. Even neighbours begin to report strange occurrences. Knocks and voices coming from 284 Green Street when the Hodgsons are away. Some say they've seen lights flicker behind the curtains, even though the electricity was shut off. 2 years pass, 2 years of sleepless nights, unanswered prayers, and unending fear. When the activity finally begins to fade, the silence feels unnatural, a kind of waiting, not peace. The family tries to move on. The cameras disappear, the reporters stop calling, but for Janet, the haunting never truly ends. In later interviews, she admits softly, "It stayed with me for years, not the voices, but the feeling, like something still watching." Even as an adult, she avoids speaking about the house for too long. When she does, her eyes shift, as if checking the corners of the room. The haunting of Enfield did not end when the sound stopped. It ended when the family learned to live with what they could never understand. They changed rooms, but the haunting changed with them. For the Hodgsons, there was no escaping 284 Green Street. As the Enfield haunting became a national obsession, the skeptics sharpened their knives. Psychologists, reporters, and stage magicians all lined up to offer rational explanations. Some said it was mass hysteria, a family unravelling under pressure. Others called it the fantasy of a lonely child. Janet and her sister Margaret, they claimed, were simply acting out. Their father had left, their home was cold and crowded, and attention from cameras brought them something they hadn't felt in a long time: importance. Reporters who spent nights in the house said they saw the girls giggling when they thought no one was watching. One journalist swore he caught Janet bending spoons. Another claimed to see her toss a pillow across the room, then scream as if it had flown on its own. Skeptics seized on these moments. If the girls faked a few incidents, they argued, how could anyone trust the rest? The tabloids went wild. Headlines blared, "Britain's greatest ghost hoax." The press tore into the story, eager to expose what they saw as a trick that fooled even experts. One investigator even recalled finding a tape recorder hidden under Janet's bed, fueling accusations that she'd been playing back sounds to spook observers. But amid the frenzy, others stood firm. They argued the family was too consistent, too frightened, and far too ordinary to sustain such an elaborate performance. The knocks, the voices, the flying objects, too many witnesses, too many records, too much fear to dismiss as childish theatre. Even among skeptics there was unease. Not all the evidence fit neatly into disbelief. Too many adults, police officers, neighbours, reporters, had seen things that defied logic. Lyon Playfair, one of the lead investigators, summed it up best. "You may not believe in ghosts," he said quietly, "but something very real was happening in that house." And that was the heart of it. No one could agree what that something was. For every explanation, another mystery appeared. For every accusation of trickery, another unexplained event surfaced. Was it hysteria, heartbreak, or haunting? In Enfield, every answer seemed to raise a darker question. Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair refused to walk away. While reporters mocked and skeptics sneered, they stayed, living inside 284 Green Street for months, sleeping on couches, enduring the same cold drafts, the same eerie nights. They had seen too much to dismiss it. Objects flying through the air, furniture dragging itself across the floor, voices booming from Janet's throat, voices no child could produce. To them, these weren't tricks. They were evidence, unsettling, imperfect, but real. Maurice Grosse, still grieving the recent death of his own daughter, became fiercely protective of the Hodgson family. He spent countless nights documenting every knock, every whisper, every moment of terror. He believed Janet was not lying. She was suffering. "She's not making this up," he told colleagues. "She's being used." Lyon Playfair agreed. As a veteran investigator and writer, he had seen hoaxes before, but Enfield felt different. The sheer scale, the unpredictability, the emotional toll, none of it fit a child's prank. He gathered hundreds of hours of audio evidence, tapes filled with knocks, voices, and movement patterns that, to his mind, defied logic. On many recordings, the sounds responded directly to their questions, as if something unseen was aware of them. Playfair later said, "You may not believe in ghosts, but something very real was happening in that house." Their defense wasn't just about proving the supernatural, it was about defending the family's dignity. They accused the press of turning a tragedy into entertainment, of mocking a mother and children who had nowhere else to go. Grosse told one reporter, "You come here for a headline." "We come here because we care what's happening to these people." But even as they fought back, the tide was turning. Public opinion had shifted. The laughter was louder than the fear. The haunting of Enfield was no longer just about ghosts. It was about belief itself. The investigators stood their ground, not to prove the supernatural, but to defend a family they believed had suffered the impossible. Time moved on, but the haunting never truly left Enfield. Decades after the last knock echoed through 284 Green Street, the case continues to divide believers and skeptics alike. To some, it was all theatre, the clever invention of children caught in a media storm. Psychologists argue it was mass hysteria, the result of stress, attention-seeking, and the power of suggestion. They claim the girls mimicked what they saw in horror films and learned how to feed the frenzy that surrounded them. But to others, including seasoned investigators, priests, and even some journalists who were there, it was something else, something far stranger. They insist that no child could have faked hundreds of incidents, dozens of voices, and phenomena witnessed by police reporters and neighbours over nearly 2 years. The arguments continue in books, in documentaries, in endless online debates. Each side presents its own version of the truth, scientific or spiritual, rational or supernatural. Yet neither side has ever managed to silence the other. Janet Hodgson herself, now an adult, has spoken publicly about those years. Her words only deepen the mystery. She admits that she and her sister sometimes exaggerated, small tricks to test the investigators, moments of childish mischief. But her voice hardens when she adds, "Most of it was real. You can't fake what we saw, what we felt. Nobody could." That confession only fuels the fire, both sides claiming it as proof of their own argument. Was Janet confessing to deceit, or confirming that the core of the haunting was genuine? In time, the Enfield Poltergeist became more than just a story. It became a mirror, a reflection of our own need to explain the unexplainable, to divide mystery into truth and lies. It was no longer about what happened inside one London home, but about the limits of human understanding itself. The legacy endures in documentaries, BBC specials, and Hollywood films like The Conjuring 2, which reimagined the haunting for a new generation. And even now, those who visit 284 Green Street speak of a chill, a sense of being watched, as if the air itself remembers. The Enfield case remains unsolved, an open question, whispered through decades of disbelief and fascination. Hoax or haunting, madness or manifestation, the Enfield mystery endures because no one ever truly closed the door. By 1979, the house on Green Street finally began to fall silent. The knocks faded. The voices stopped calling Janet's name. The toys that once hurled themselves across rooms now sat untouched, gathering dust. After nearly 2 years of chaos, the Hodgson family was left in a fragile, uneasy calm, as though the house had simply grown tired of tormenting them. Janet, now entering her teens, tried to return to a normal life, but normal never really came. She was haunted not by ghosts, but by memories, the cameras, the whispers, the laughter of skeptics. For years she refused to speak about what happened. When she finally did, her words reignited the debate. She admitted that she and her sister Margaret had faked a few incidents, moments of mischief, she said, to test the investigators or relieve tension. But she insisted that most of it, the voices, the levitations, the fear, was real. It was real to us, she told an interviewer decades later. It didn't matter what anyone else thought. Even today, scientists and skeptics continue to study the case. Experts in acoustics analyze the voice recordings, trying to understand how an 11-year-old girl could produce such guttural tones without damaging her throat. Others pore over photographs of Janet mid-air, arguing over whether she was leaping, falling, or truly levitating. No one has ever conclusively proven a hoax. For believers, Enfield stands as one of the most compelling proofs of supernatural activity ever recorded. For skeptics, it remains a cautionary tale, a testament to how fear, grief, and media attention can create modern folklore. Either way, the case refuses to fade into obscurity. Its legacy stretches beyond 284 Green Street. It inspired countless documentaries, books, and perhaps most famously, The Conjuring 2, which brought the haunting to the world stage once again. The story continues to capture imaginations, not because it offers answers, but because it never did. Even now, those who step into the house say it feels off. The temperature drops and the quiet is never truly silent, as if something remains, waiting, watching, remembering. The activity may have ended, but the questions never did. Decades later, the Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most documented, debated, and hauntingly human stories ever told. In that small London home, fear and fascination collided. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist blurs the line between the psychological and the supernatural, between what we think we know and what might exist just beyond our understanding. Was it a hoax crafted by restless children? A case of mass hysteria amplified by grief and the media? Or did something truly otherworldly take hold of that house on Green Street? More than 40 years later, the answers remain as elusive as the knocks in the night that first started it all. If you want us to explore more real-life hauntings and true stories of possessions from around the world, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more chilling mysteries. And tell us in the comments, what do you believe? Was the Enfield Poltergeist real, or just a ghost story gone too far?